Welcome back, one and all, to Mystic Radio. I am your host, Spirit Lady Robin Alexis. And remember, Mystic Radio is always an experience, not an explanation. It is up to you to discern if what you hear rings true to you or not. We're not telling you what to think. We are just encouraging you to know, trust, and act upon your own knowing. Now, you may be wondering why, after 19 years, Bob and I ended the show, or so we thought, but then I met Ken Sylvester. So what is so intriguing about Ken Sylvester? Well, I wrote an Amazon best-selling book called A Conversation with Extraterrestrials, and I wanted to learn more about other authors who wrote about UFOs, etc. So I bought Amazon best-selling book, We're Not Alone, and Here's the Proof by Ken Sylvester. And my mind was blown reading this book. And frequently, as I would read the different chapters, the extraterrestrials that he was writing about would begin to speak with me telepathically. So through a wonderful moment in my life, I was able to get Ken's phone number, and I called him, and he called me back. And we started having, out-of-this-world communication conversations. And then I was starting to tell my husband about them, and he got in on it too. And he said he wanted to know, is Jesus an alien? And we were talking back and forth about that. And then it was like, okay, we just need to start Mystic Radio back up again for a special season where Ken and I are sharing these different conversations. So, because I know you guys. I know you're going to be interested in this sort of thing. So now, we're not going to talk about is Jesus an alien in this show. I will tell you that my dad, who has crossed over, claims he is not. My father says that Jesus can present himself in any way he wants to anyone. So, for example, he can look one way to us and maybe take on another life form to another type of life form. So my dad, he says that Jesus is a resurrected frequency who can be in one form, go through a transformation, and then resurrect into another one and just maintain his consciousness. But that's my dad's perspective. We can have more conversations in the future about whether Jesus is an alien or not. But let's get to what we're going to talk about today, and I'm extremely excited. We have a very, very, very special guest on top of the already special guest, Ken Sylvester. But let's get Ken here first. Welcome to the show, Ken.
Welcome, Robin.
I'm so excited that we are sharing our books with people, and we get to have these cool conversations, and people who have read our books are letting us know they want to come on the show as a guest. And today I have an amazing guest. Her name is Dr. Ellen Cool. So how cool is that name? And Ellen has listened to Mystic Radio for a very, very long time. Welcome, Ellen.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so very excited to have you here. You know, for some people who are just starting to listen to Mystic Radio, I thought maybe, Ellen, you could help them understand what the show is about. Do you have any idea how many years you've listened to Mystic Radio?
I think it's got to be close to 15 or 16 because I found it during lunchtime. I was working at a private progressive school, and my son and another person's child had noon dismissal at high school. And I was granted permission to leave at noon and come back to teach my classes at 1. And so I had on KKNW and started listening and never stopped.
Oh, wow. So for people who don't know what I do on a radio show, would you mind kind of sharing the kinds of things that you witnessed happening with people who would call into the show?
Sure. It's really, truly about learning to know what you know that you know. Mm-hmm. And you offer opportunity to trust yourself. That's what the biggest thing I learned from you. And every person you talk to, it can serve as a surrogate healing for any of us if it applies. So through you, I worked on abundance issues. I worked on mothering issues. I worked on twin flame issues. I've worked on relationship issues. And you combine like the mundane with the cosmic.
Yeah, someone called me a practical mystic once, and I really like that because I do feel like I've got both feet on the ground. And, to be able to function as a human when we are multidimensional, it's an art. It takes practice. And I think, for us to be talking about extraterrestrials and UFOs, especially, when in the past it was so denied, here we are talking about it, especially because people like Ken Sylvester. Ken, what do you want to throw into this conversation?
Well, one thing that I was interested in reading your background is how you are able to connect with aliens and get them to channel through you. How does that work?
Well, it just it happened very organically, as all of my skill set did. I have had 3 near-death experiences, which maybe we'll talk about at some point on these shows. But as a result of them, one of the gifts that I have is that when I would be abducted by extraterrestrials, which has happened a lot of times, some very pleasant and some very unpleasant, I would remember the experiences, and the extraterrestrials who were abducting me were shocked. They were like, oh my God, this one is a live wire. She knows what we're doing and she can talk to us. And so the different species would interact with me. And then I began to realize that they were just kind of bowling me over, and I had to teach them how to respect me and work with me. And the ones that weren't good to me, I would put my foot down and say, no, you can't have access to me anymore. And sometimes they would do what I call break universal law, that even though I told them not to do whatever they were doing to me, they would continue. And I've learned to call in the Universal Police or the Karmic Board or the Galactic Federation, whoever it is out there that can handle those kinds of beings. I would have them come in and assist me, and it did work. Sometimes it would be archangels, but whatever. You get the drift that you have to learn how to navigate this, just like you have to learn everything else. And sometimes the extraterrestrials, they won't be an actual experience that I have, but it could also be that I would see them clairvoyantly. And what I mean by that is, if sometimes I just see things in what's called the third eye. It's the place right between your eyes and the forehead area. But other times, even with my eyes open, I would see like a 3D image of different extraterrestrials or spirits standing in front of me, and I would converse with them telepathically. So the way I communicate to extraterrestrials is very based on who's communicating and what the adaptability is to how it's going to take place. Now, in the book I wrote called A Conversation with Extraterrestrials, in that one I was abducted when I was 11 years old, and I had a friend with me. Her name is Cindy, and she and I essentially hadn't talked for decades, and we hooked up through Facebook, and then we had a conversation that we recorded, and the extraterrestrial who was the head ET who abducted me spoke through me, and he calls himself Maxwell. And anyway, that was a very unpleasant experience, and at some point, I'll talk about it, but that's not where we're going to delve into in this show. In this show, Maxwell actually wanted to speak with Ellen, and I did get in touch with Ellen, and I asked her if she'd read both of our books, and she did. So let's go back to you, Ellen. Is there any comment you'd like to make about A Conversation with Extraterrestrials or Ken's book, We're Not Alone, and Here's the Proof?
I'm eagerly awaiting the sequel to A Conversation with Extraterrestrials. So I'm hoping you'll have another book out soon.
Yes, I'll answer that right now. When we recorded the conversation that became the book, A Conversation with Extraterrestrials, there's actually already enough content for the second book, A Second Conversation with Extraterrestrials. But I have not been guided to release it, and I think the reason is because it's like destiny that I met Ken, and now Ken and I are writing some things together where the book will actually end up being A Second Conversation with Extraterrestrials by Ken Sylvester and Robin Alexis. So that is what's going on with that book, and I am grateful that you're looking forward to it and that you brought it up so I could explain it.
Well, that is exciting. I'd just like to say to anyone who's listening to this, if you don't have We're Not Alone and Here's the Proof yet, it is a very easy book to read because each chapter is short and a nice little story. So you don't have to read it all at once. You can just pick it up and read it.
Yeah, I really like the way that Ken wrote that book too. Ken, what do you want to say about that?
Well, Robin, that's a good question. And what I was looking to do was take these top UFO stories, and there's about 40 of them, and most of them are 300 to 500 pages long. And the reason they're that long is they have to fill in backstory. So they would go into great details about each witness and, where they come from and how long they've lived in the city and what they've done, anything to fill up the pages of the book. So I shortened it down to taking out just the most important facts and stating those. And then through my research was adding new information that's happened since the book's come out. And in fact, we just did a show on Roswell, which is going to be the third show. And while I was researching Roswell, I was able to pick up some new information. And then when I was rewriting this, prepping it for the show, I was able to obtain some more updates. So it's got all the latest updates going back within the last 2 years. There is another incident where a documentary was done by James Fox, who is a UFO researcher, and he did a documentary on Brazil, which is another show, in 2022. And then it's extraordinary, compelling video when you watch it. And so those all got added in so that the readers were going to get the most up-to-date and as factual information as I could provide.
Well, when I read your book, I was in awe that you were able to encapsulate such a global, broad, ongoing understanding of the contact that's been going on for the civilization of this planet for a very long time, and put it into a book where we can actually talk about it on this podcast. And like you said, even as we're doing the podcast, you're getting new information. So, there's so much to talk about. But let's switch back now to you, Ellen, because Maxwell, who is the extraterrestrial again, who spoke through me in the book, A Conversation with Extraterrestrials, he is he's very, very strong energy right now. He is a mantis being. And he wants to talk to you about a couple things. One is health, and the second thing he wants to talk to you about is your property. But he's asking, first of all, would you tell people what your PhD is in?
Oh, sure. My PhD is in transformative studies and consciousness. And I went to California Institute of Integral Studies, where I did a transdisciplinary look at child development, consciousness studies, and early childhood education and care. And I weaved together what I learned about child development and consciousness studies and put it together with practical approaches for how to raise conscious humans. And one of my conclusions was that humans are born conscious, and we basically brainwash it out of ourselves by the time we're 7 and cognition kicks in.
Well, that's fascinating because that's exactly what Maxwell wanted to talk to you about in terms of health. Do you want to speak at all about any health problems you have, or do you want me to just go into what Maxwell is saying?
I'm curious to hear what Maxwell is saying.
Okay. So welcome, Maxwell, and thank you for coming on the show with us. What he's saying is that he believes, this is his perspective of you, Ellen, he says that he believes you're an empathic intuitive, and that as you have been studying these different things around consciousness, that has allowed you to be so open-minded that you would have a conversation with an extraterrestrial. He says that your individual consciousness has gotten like infected or some sort of contagion in it, where when you would look at different things, your individual consciousness would absorb what it was meant to be observing. And so instead of just looking at something, you would absorb what you were looking at energetically, and it would get kind of convoluted into your system, and then your brain didn't know what to do with it, and then it would signal to your body to become ill because it didn't know what to do with it. So it's interesting that your PhD is in consciousness, and that obviously it would be really helpful for children who, as they are going to have to deal with space brothers and space sisters way more than we did, because it's happening. And so he is saying that your PhD is in complete harmony with, if you will, your earthly mission or your soul purpose. But he's also saying that the very fact that you experience something that you don't want other people to have, which is as you're awakening and observing these things, that you absorb it, and then it could make you sick physically. Do you understand what Maxwell is saying to you?
Yes.
And do you have any questions that you want to say to Maxwell or even to me about how, you know, if this resonates to you, which it sounds like it does?
Well, it's interesting because it manifested as dizzy spells or vertigo, but I didn't put it together without this information. So thank you, Maxwell.
Ah, okay. So what Maxwell is saying is that the original human DNA, the amygdala in the back of our heads, was supposed to carry the wisdom that we learned from one lifetime to the next, that we weren't supposed to have programmed into our amygdalas the trauma of everything. And he says that humans have, as you said, brainwashed, but he says it's not only what we have learned when we come into these bodies that can be traumatic, especially because it's disconnecting us from the very thing that is our core knowing, which is our wisdom that we've gathered from various incarnations, and that without that wisdom, it's difficult to actually fulfill what your earthly mission is, and that in order to get to that knowing, that buried treasure, we have to, so far, experience all this trauma, which is not only what we experience, but it's also in the bloodline of our ancestors. So he says that alone can mess us up. And then when we start trying to awaken to our, abilities and relationships to other life forms, it can be even more situational, problematic. So what he's saying to you, Ellen, is that one of the reasons why you moved to the property that you're on well, I don't need to say where you're living. You can say that if you want to. But he's saying that the land there carries the memory of the appropriate original intention of the amygdala, where the body can remember its wisdom without the trauma, and therefore it's easier to be able to maintain observing things instead of absorbing it and having different physical sensations. Do you understand what he's saying?
That felt so good. Yeah.
Okay. So do you have any questions?
Just appreciation and gratitude for the information.
Okay. So now he knows that he can be very off-putting, so he wouldn't want to do anything or provide anything that you don't give permission, but he's offering to help adjust your amygdala so that it is functioning in harmony with the health and well-being of what was the original intention of the human body's amygdala. Do you give him permission to do that?
I would give you, Robin, permission, but I am not ready to trust Maxwell with that level of
I think that's very, very prudent. Now, before I go any further with that, Ken, is there anything that you'd like to say about this?
Yeah, I wish you could explain just a little bit more. When she was going to adjust her, what did you call it, the amygdala?
Amygdala. It's actually, I can't even describe exactly what the amygdala is. My understanding is it's in the back of the head, and my understanding is that it's like where maybe we would call the reptilian brain, where we get into fight, flight, fawn, or freeze as a survival mechanism. And so when our bodies go into that and our mental bodies go into that, we become very vulnerable because we're not functioning, we're kind of like not cooking on all of our burners, let's say. And so then other information can become abusive to us, right? Because we can't protect ourselves correctly. We can't maintain our sovereignty. And so what he's saying to us is that reptilian brain originally was meant to carry the wisdom of the soul and not be, so beaten up that in order to even get to our soul memory and wisdom, we had to go through all this stuff. He's actually talking to me again, and he's saying another way of saying this is that, a common term that many people have heard is post-traumatic stress syndrome or post-traumatic stress disorder, meaning that we've been frightened to the point, usually either fear of death or rape, that it just gets stuck in us, so that if anything triggers that type of trauma, we go back into being at the age that happened to us, and we can get stuck unless we can heal ourselves. And when we are like that, if we're around someone else that's like that, we trigger it back and forth to each other. So then all of a sudden you've got a whole global collective consciousness that's fighting each other because nobody trusts each other and nobody's actually in their sovereignty anymore. Do you understand what he just said, Ken?
Yes. I have to absorb it a little more. I've written some notes, but basically I understand what you're saying, yes.
Yeah, he's saying that this is basically the cause of disease in our body because our brain doesn't know what to do with all this stuff, and then our body ends up making us sick. And then he said the other way that it expresses itself is it creates war on some fashion, whether it's a disagreement or it's flat out, we're killing each other. So he says that frequency, it usually either creates cancer or war. So it's either like an internal thing or an external thing. And he says we can plainly see with what's going on in the planet today that discernment is key, which was just practiced by both of you, even with him, which he says is very prudent, that you both respected yourselves enough not to dismiss the fact that you weren't going to trust him or give him your loyalty without making him earn it. And so even though he's speaking these concerns that from his perspective are going on, we are maintaining, all three of us, our individual consciousness. And he says that is key, that if anyone is going to, you know what? I am now getting signaled that we are going to have to wrap this up. And what we're going to do...
Yes, Robin. I'd like to add just one last thought and tell our listeners about our next show. We'll continue some of this conversation, but I'm going to take them to Zimbabwe, Africa, where the students there had a close encounter of the third kind, and that will be part of the next show.
Well, I'm super excited about that. And Ellen, since your degree is working with children, would you be willing to come on our next show?
Oh, absolutely. And I've read that Zimbabwe chapter, so I am aware of what we'll be talking about.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for listening to Mystic Radio with Robin Alexis with our special guests, Ken Sylvester and Dr. Ellen Kuhl. And if you guys would like to come on the show, what you need to do is email me at spiritladyrobin@gmail.com. And we do encourage people to keep looking up at the sky and let us know if you think you're seeing a UFO. We want to share those opportunities and experiences with you. And of course, I want to remind you that if you want to take a look at Ken's book on Amazon, you go to Amazon and search Ken Sylvester, We're Not Alone, and Here's the Proof. And you can also look at my book, A Conversation with Extraterrestrials by Robin Alexis. And that way you can, just learn more about what we're talking about. And I do also want to invite you to my website, robinalexis.com. I do one-on-one phone readings, personalized Reiki weeks, and I do have an online Soul Spa membership and very interesting blogs where I will always be posting about this show. So thank you, everyone, for listening to Mystic Radio. Choose love and let life's mysteries unfold. And we'll see you next week on Mystic Radio. Thank you, Ken and Ellen. Namaste.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you. Bye.